The general misconception of PC gaming is that you need to pay a large amount of money to be able to get good gaming performance. While top-of-the-line components are indeed expensive, budget components on the other hand are improving and becoming better each year.
And today, we'll be checking out two products from MSI's budget component line, the Mortar B250M and GT1030 Overclock Edition.
Both retailing for $80. While I don't expect this setup, specifically the graphics card, to be able to play demanding titles at high to max settings, I'm interested in something else. With the backings of professional organizations like Fnatic that have done extended testings on these products,
What I'm interested to know is if this is the best esports budget setup. Well, let's find out.
Starting out with the Mortar B250M. This motherboard is rocking a military design which really lives up to its name. The red, black, and silver color scheme looks clean and is very versatile for any type of color scheme for your build. The aesthetics of this board immediately caught my attention, so a huge plus to MSI for that. Moving on to its features, this motherboard has the LGA 1151 socket, which supports Intel's latest 6th and 7th generation processors. At the back, you can see the port selection. We have two USB 2.0 ports, a PS2 port which is perfect for those of you who have a mechanical keyboard with PS2 functionality, three USB 3.0 ports, DVI, HDMI, DisplayPort, Gigabit Ethernet port, and a Realtek high-definition audio port. We also have a single USB Type-C slot for future devices that will be moving on to this type of connectivity. Next, for our storage options, we have a Turbo M.2 slot for SSDs and 6 SATA ports for a total capacity of 7 hard drives, which is another unusual feature for motherboards in this price range. Finally, we have 4 fan headers with full fan control, which gives a good flexibility on your rig's cooling system. The B250M also supports overclocking for the supported CPUs. While the CPU of our test bench does not support overclocking, this still leaves a lot of flexibility for your high-end builds. The BIOS is nice and simple, which is good both for new and experienced overclockers. AMD Crossfire is supported in this board with the 2 PCIe X16 slots, but sadly not Nvidia's SLI. The Mortar B250M supports up to 64GB of memory. This motherboard is also VR ready for all your VR peripherals. HD audio is another feature that MSI seems very proud of, so we'll be checking that out later. Finally, the motherboard has red LED lighting that can be controlled through software. I would have liked to see an RGB implementation to color match with my setup or other setups which may not be red, but that is not a major complaint. Do take note that there is no onboard Wi-Fi for this board, so a bit of a hassle. So now, let's move on to our graphics card, the Aero GT1030 2GB Overclockable Edition. Let's get down with the specs. It has a boost clock of 1518MHz and a base clock of 1265MHz. It has 2GB of GDDR5 VRAM with 6008MHz of memory speed. This version has slightly higher clock and memory speeds as compared to the stock version, which has a boost clock of 1468MHz and a memory speed of 3000MHz. This card is also overclockable using MSI's Afterburner software. Do take note that core voltage and power limit is locked, so only temperature limit, core clock, and memory clock can be configured. Also, this card requires no power from your power supply. For the connectivity, the Aero GT1030 has an HDMI and DVI out. Overall build quality is pretty good. Plus, with its small form factor, you can use it in mini ITX builds.
Before we proceed to our benchmarks, I'd like to discuss some things that I really didn't like about the graphics card.
First of all, Nvidia's Shadowplay is not supported. This is a huge deal for people like me who'd like to record game footage. Windows 10's built-in Xbox DVR does not work either. So this means that if you want to record your gameplay, then you'd have to use an external game capture card or use a software that would cause drastic drops in your FPS. Another thing is its lack of support for game streaming and G-Sync. While this is to be expected from a budget graphics card,
I kinda find it disappointing and frustrating that GeForce Experience is compatible with this card, even though none of its features work.
for the purpose of this review, our test bench would comprise of an Intel i7-7700 clocked at 3.6 GHz, G-Skill 16GB Trident Z DDR4 RGB RAM, Intel 256GB M.2 SSD, and of course, both our Mortar B250M motherboard and Aero GT1030 OC edition. While this setup might seem overkill, it basically enables us to remove all sorts of bottlenecks, enabling our graphics card to perform in the best possible scenario. Now, with that out of the way, let's take a look at some benchmarks. Let's start out with our synthetic benchmarks. Unigen's Heaven on medium texture settings struggled, which gave the following results. Next is Firestrike. It is very evident that this card was not intended for graphically demanding games, as it also struggled in this benchmark, producing really low FPS. Here are the results. Next, we move on to our esports titles. Starting out with League of Legends. This game isn't really graphically demanding, nor is it hard to run, but lower-end systems with integrated or low-end graphics cards tend to have problems with this game, but not with our graphics card. The GT1030 completely crushes this game with an average of 135.37 FPS, a minimum of 17 FPS, and a maximum of 254 FPS, using the maximum settings. Next, we have Overwatch. With the high settings preset, we get an average of 66.92 FPS, a minimum of 40 FPS, and the maximum of 72 FPS. Gameplay throughout the match was smooth and had no problems at all. It was the same story for Dota 2. With the best quality settings preset, we got an average of 69.33 FPS, a minimum of 21 FPS, and a maximum of 80 FPS. Really great numbers here. But then, I really wanted to test more graphically demanding games. Doom 2016 is a game that the GT1030 can run, but won't give you a satisfying experience. Using the medium preset, I was able to get an average of 40.76 FPS, a minimum of 29 FPS, and a maximum of 60 FPS. This was done during the first two levels, as those were both indoor and outdoor sequences. However, there were areas that averaged on 30 FPS and some that even dropped to 20. And to make matters worse, there was some screen tearing and the game was noticeably not smooth. Definitely playable, but not enjoyable. Rise of the Tomb Raider, on the other hand, was more playable in my opinion. It had an average of 47.19 FPS, a minimum of 29 FPS, and a maximum of 63 FPS. On low, the graphics may not look great, but performance was consistent and surely enjoyable. Now, let's talk about our overclock. After adding 120 MHz on the core clock and 200 MHz on the memory clock, we got barely noticeable results. Doom averaged at 43.27 FPS, with minimum of 29 and max of 60 FPS. Firestrike and Heaven scores also did not significantly change. Not a huge increase and not significant. Even after gaming for extended periods of time, I was still able to get good thermals as it did not exceed 50 degrees Celsius. Throughout my testing, I can attest that the HD audio lived up to MSI's claims as the games felt really immersive. So, conclusion time. Let's start out with the Mortar B250M. This motherboard is built well and has a huge selection of I/O ports. I guarantee you that you won't ever run out of ports. Also, the design gives the users the freedom on their build. This is because of the overclocking feature, good BIOS, crossfire support, VR support, and the SATA and M.2 connections. Also, the build quality of the board is really good and would assure the durability of this board. And of course, this motherboard's aesthetics is on point, and not to mention, all of this for a solid price point. However, there are some minor details that I didn't like. The LED lights could have been RGB to match setups better. The lack of an onboard Wi-Fi was also something that I didn't like. And finally, the lack of support for SLI. Again, not a big deal, but something for MSI to consider for their next iteration. The Aero GT1030 on the other hand also has lots of things to love. It can run most if not all of today's esports titles at max to high settings. For a GT card, this one's truly a beast. It is also power efficient as it doesn't need to draw power from the power supply. And of course, it runs really cool in my system. But it has its fair share of flaws. Due to its limited VRAM, a lot of applications don't work, such as recording and streaming software. Also, while the card is overclockable, it really doesn't make it perform a lot better. And this card surely struggles with graphically intensive games.
Going back to the original question, is this the best esports bundle for the price? Well, yes. Yes, it is. The GT1030 is truly a beast with esports titles like Dota and League of Legends. And while I did have some problems with my professional workflow, I still have no problem recommending it. And also, the motherboard is so flexible that it's good both for budget and high-end builds. So if you're thinking about getting any of these products, then please do so. Go out and buy right now.
So that's the end of my video, guys. I hope you really enjoyed it. Please leave a like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you on the next one.